So in this video, we're going to be looking at the Home Rule movement. So we've been building up to the Home Rule movement throughout this course, right? Even when we were talking about the Swadeshi movement, we were talking about the Home Rule movement. The Home Rule movement was one of the biggest non-Gandhian movements, and it preceded the involvement of Gandhi in active Indian politics. The Home Rule League is synonymous with Lokamanya Balagangadhar Tilak and Annie Besant. It was in June of 1914 that Lokamanya Tilak was released after spending a prison term of 6 years in Mandalay in Burma. You may remember that post the Swadeshi movement, there was a big crackdown, and Bal Gangadhar Tilak was one of the leaders who was arrested, and he was sent to Burma for jail for 6 years, and he spent this in Mandalay in Burma. The other two extremist leaders, that is Aurobindo and Lala Lajpat Rai, were nowhere on the political scene. We have already told you this, that Aurobindo had immersed himself in spirituality in Pondicherry, building a huge ashram. This ashram continues to thrive even today. It is called Auroville. Lala Lajpat Rai Lala Lajpat Rai went away to the United States. The repression of the Swadeshi movement had taken a toll on him. But it was the overpowering and unwavering attitude of the Lokamanya to serve the people that led him to waste no time in beginning the preparation for yet another major movement the moment he came back to India after serving his prison term. Tilak, after returning from jail, focused all his energies on trying to regain admission into the folds of Congress for himself and for the other extremists. Tilak was convinced that for the success of any political action, the sanction and support of the Congress was a necessary precondition, as the Congress had come to symbolize the Indian national movement. Tilak said the right things to woo the moderates, that he was giving up violence completely, that the idea was to reform the system of administration and not overthrow it, and the usual rhetoric that was associated with the moderates. To win over the Congress, he further assured the British government in India of his support and urged all Indians to assist Britain in this hour of crisis. Remember, this was in 1914. That means World War I had begun and Britain was in its hour of crisis. Congress was also under considerable pressure from Annie Besant, a leader of the Theosophical Society, to accept Tilak back into its folds. Annie Besant was already 66 years old in 1914. She began her political career in England as a proponent of free thought, radicalism, Fabianism, and Theosophy. She had come to India in 1893. She worked relentlessly from her headquarters in Adyar in Madras and had built up quite a following of educated Indians who had experienced no cultural revival of their own. It was in 1914 that Annie Besant decided to enlarge the sphere of her activities to include building of a movement for Home Rule on the lines of the Irish Home Rule League. So, the Irish Home Rule League was the inspiration for Annie Besant to begin the Indian Home Rule League. Annie Besant realized that the sanction of the Congress and the cooperation of the extremists were both necessary to achieve this. Hence, she pushed the Congress to accept Tilak and the other extremists into the Congress fold. However, in spite of all the pressure from Annie Besant and the willingness of Gokhale and co. to bring the extremists back into the Congress fold, in December 1914 session of Congress, Tilak and the extremists were kept out by Firoz Shah Mehta and his colleagues. You may remember that it was Firoz Shah Mehta who held the sway even in the 1907 Surat session of Congress, which led to the Surat split. Once again, it would be Firoz Shah Mehta and his colleagues who would continue their moderate journey and who would try to keep Tilak out. Gokhale once again buckled under pressure from Firoz Shah Mehta and co. For all his brilliance, Gokhale would never learn to press his point home, even at the direst hour of need, a task that Gandhiji, his student, had mastered. Tilak and Besant now decided to revive political activity on their own while maintaining pressure on the Congress to readmit the extremist group. In early 1915, Annie Besant began to demand self-government for India on the lines of other white colonies after the war. This she did through her two papers, New India and Commonwealth. She organized public meetings and conferences, and her stance was now aggressive. Lokamanya began his political work on a low key from the ground level, enlightening the villagers of the work that the Congress was doing and its objectives. He was careful not to alarm the moderates by doing anything before being totally admitted into the Congress camp. Firoz Shah Mehta, meanwhile, passed away. Tilak and Besant's work were greatly applauded. Hence, in the 1915 session of Congress, with Firoz Shah Mehta gone, Tilak and the extremists were admitted into the folds of the Congress. However, Annie Besant still did not get the support from Congress to set up her Home Rule Leagues. She did, however, manage to convince Congress to commit itself to a program of educative propaganda and to revival of local Congress committees. Knowing that the Congress, in its present form of lethargy, was unlikely to implement this decision, she set a condition that if the Congress did not start this activity by September of 1916, she would be free to set up her own Home Rule Leagues. Tilak was not bound by any such commitment, and he had regained his entry into Congress. He now took the lead in setting up the Home Rule Leagues at the Bombay Provincial Congress held in Belgaum in April 1916. Jamnadas Dwarakdas, Shankarlal Banker, and Indulal Yagnik set up a Bombay paper called Young India and launched an All India propaganda fund to establish pamphlets in regional languages and in English. As expected, Congress did not act on its promise of reviving the provincial Congress committees, and Annie Besant now started her Home Rule Leagues along with George Arundel, her organizing secretary. The areas where Tilak was to work and the areas where Annie Besant was to work were demarcated so that there would be no friction between the supporters of the two factions. Tilak looked after Maharashtra, excluding Bombay city, Karnataka, central provinces, and Berar. Annie Besant's league was given charge of the rest of the country. So, Maharashtra, Karnataka, central provinces, and Berar. This was what was looked after by Tilak. Rest of the country, including Madras, was being looked after by Annie Besant and her followers. The reason the two leagues did not merge, in the words of Annie Besant, was this. Some of my followers had a problem with him, and some of his followers had a problem with me. We, however, had no quarrel with each other. We will look at Tilak and Besant in greater detail in the next video as we continue looking at the Home Rule League. This concludes this video. Thank you.